to our 2025 virtual horse management seminar. I'm really excited to have some great speakers for this series, so thank you for joining us, everybody. Just a little background, if you've not been to one of these before and do not know me, I am Dr. Carrie Williams. I'm the Equine Extension Specialist at Rutgers University, and I'm also the Associate Director of Extension for the Equine Science Center. With me today, I have Kyle Hartman. He's the man behind the curtain at the Rutgers Equine Science Center. If you have any technical difficulties, if for some reason you're not hearing me, not seeing something, or having any problems, just go ahead and type in the chat what your problem is, and he's going to be able to get back to you with and hopefully help you with any problems you have. Just keep in mind the chat only comes to us as speakers or the hosts or panelists. Not everybody that's on the webinar will be able to see it. So that's why we save that for only technical help. So with that being said, I do want to mention as well, we are recording these. We do every year. We have ever since, so 2021 was our last or our first virtual horse management seminar. And we've been doing it every year since because we get worldwide audience and we get so many people from such a far reach across the country. It's been really fun to continue them. They are all recorded and they are all posted on our Equine Science Center Facebook or YouTube page. So we have all of the series from all of the past years. This one will also be housed there, but we don't put it up until the series is all over. So it's probably going to be posted sometime around early March. And as long as you're registered, you're going to get the email announcing when it's actually been posted. So keep your eye open. You can also tell some of your friends or colleagues, if they haven't been able to make it, that they can go on and watch it on the YouTube page. Or if they want to, they can also register, and then they're going to get the email announcing when the virtual recordings have been posted. So they can go ahead and do that as well. And again, it'll probably be early March before they are. So just a couple of other housekeeping things before we get rolling. I also want to mention that if you have questions during the seminars, and the speakers have allowed plenty of time at the end, so we will have lots of time for questions, but the only way they're going to be able to get answered is if you use the Q&A button, and that's going to be at the bottom of your screen. If you just kind of hover over the bottom of your screen, you'll see a bunch of buttons pop up, and this one will say Q&A. So go ahead and type your question into the Q&A box, and that's where I'm going to be pulling them from at the end when we go ahead and moderate questions. And the other reason why it's good to put them there is because I'll be able to keep track which ones have already been answered. And we also might be able to, maybe ask Laura if she'd stay for a little bit. If there's any that haven't been answered, she's going to be able to go in that Q&A box and see which ones haven't been answered and maybe get back to you as well on some answers. So that's the Q&A box, chat box for tech help or to talk to the moderators. So the next thing that I really want to do is kind of fun, but you're going to need to be on another browser. So whether you have your phone with you or on you or something, or you have another computer or another screen, I would love to have you do a little survey for me because I'm introducing you to all of our speakers, but all of our speakers also want to hear from you. So we've got just a couple questions. So I am going to get out of this slide for just a minute and go here. So what you need to do is go to menti.com, and that's MENTI, menti.com. So once you're there, there's the code at the top of your screen. Kyle's also going to put in a bunch of information in the chat so you can see the menti.com and then the link to the code. So you have to enter in 9576 0961. And when you come into this poll, you're going to see a question about what state you're in or country. Please don't abbreviate because everybody that says New Jersey, the more New Jersey people we have, the bigger that word is going to be. But if you use NJ, then it's not going to catch it. So please type out the whole state or country if you're in another country. And I love to keep track of what other countries we have. That's kind of one of my favorite things. So it looks like we've got about 138 attendees, and we've got 42, 44, 45. We got a few more people logging into Menti. So I'm going to leave this go for a little bit because I'd love to see it all change. So we have a lot from New Jersey. Of course, I have a very big list of people. So does the Equine Science Center that participate in a lot of our programs. Our first speaker today is from Pennsylvania, so I assumed we would get some from there. But let's see about our other states. We've got Virginia coming up, Wisconsin, Georgia, North Carolina, New York, and Michigan, Colorado, Indiana. What about our speakers? Where's our Arizonas and our Minnesotas? They're probably so small in there and they're moving so quick I can't see. Oh, what about countries? I see Philippines. Welcome, Philippines. I think I saw Brazil somewhere on there. Welcome. Mexico, welcome. Oh, I see some Arizona floating in there now. Remember, if you're coming in late, don't abbreviate your state because we want to make sure we capture all of them. So you have to spell it out completely. Spell out your state. What about, so Philippines, we're starting to slow down a little bit. I'll keep giving it a little bit of time, and then we'll go on to our next question. So we have a nice distribution here. We've got about 90 people logged into Menti. That's great. We have almost 150 attendees right now, so that's excellent. Thank you guys for joining us today. So you can keep filling this out, but I'm going to go to the next question so that I make sure I give my speakers all of the time that they have. So this next question is, what is your primary interaction with horses? So I allow you to pick 3 things. So if you're a horse owner, but also teach lessons and manage your barn, you can pick those 3. Or if you're just a real enthusiast, but you might work at a tack shop or a feed store, then you're a professional. So go ahead and pick your top 3 primary interactions with horses. I'm sure you could be all of these, but pick kind of your primary things. So we definitely have a lot of horse owners, so that's great. And we'll wait a little bit. And if you're other, so I see a couple of you are coming on with other. I would love it if you typed in the chat, what is other? And I'll go ahead and read a couple of them. Because I know sometimes in the past by other, we usually have a lot of like therapeutic riding instructors or path instructors. We've had several of them. We've also had some rescues or sanctuaries. So if you want to go ahead and type what your other is, I won't read who you are. I'll just read, what it is. You can go ahead and chat, and I'll read a couple of the other categories out. We have a lot of horse owners and horse enthusiasts. Great. I love that you guys are here. We've got some trainers and barn managers as well as, a few veterinarians. Welcome. Industry professionals. Great. Thank you. Awesome. We've got some that are developing equine therapy sessions. That's great too. We've got a few more people coming on. I'll leave this go for just a little bit. Got those in extension. Oh, somebody said their chat is disabled. So Kyle, I don't know if that's something we can change right now or not, but I am a speech pathologist. Great. A board certified hippotherapist. Great. Okay, looks like the chat's now enabled, so go ahead. Sorry, guys, about that one. Therapeutic riding instructors, 4-H club leaders, vet technicians, barn owners. Great, we got a whole bunch of fun stuff. Graduate students, welcome graduate students. Awesome, thank you. Path instructors, barefoot trimmer, you own senior horses. That's awesome. That's great. Thank you guys very much for participating in the survey. What I like to do with this, and I'm actually going to go back, I want to see all of our states and how they've changed. So what I like to do is I like to look at all of our states and all of our countries that are involved and use these little graphics for advertising purposes and and to show the impact and our reach for our programs. So thank you guys for that. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing for a little bit and bring us back to Zoom. And I think it's my turn to now introduce our first speaker. So I'm really excited to welcome Laura Kenny, and she can start pulling up her slides at any time. Laura Kenny is going to talk to us today about small farm pasture management. So Laura is an equine extension educator for Penn State. She focuses all of her programming on pasture management on horse farms, providing workshops, pasture walks, webinars, online courses, farm visits, etc. She's won a lot of national awards, like the Search for Excellence Award in 2023. She also works with the rest of their equine team on horse health and horse care initiatives. Even more importantly, Rutgers, Laura is a Rutgers alum. She got both her bachelor's and her master's in equine science. And yes, she was one of my graduate students and did a lot of pasture work while she was with me, but got her degree specifically in plant biology. She now owns one of her favorite research horses, Frankie, who we're going to see lots of pictures of, I am sure. So I'm going to go ahead and mute and turn off my camera, and we're going to go ahead and welcome Laura. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Can you see the right screen right now?
Yes, I can, Laura. Thank you.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. Gonna move my little picture around here. Okay. So again, my name is Laura Kenny. I'm an equine extension educator with Penn State Extension. And a lot of my job involves going out, doing pasture visits for people and helping them come up with a plan to improve their pastures. And I'd say probably 75% of the farms that I go to, I would consider a small farm, maybe 5 or 6 acres or less. Typically, I'm in like Southeast Pennsylvania area, so it's pretty similar to New Jersey. Um, and I see there's people from all over the country, all over the world here. So this might be a little bit Northeast focused, but I will always recommend you talk to your county extension agent in your state if you have location specific questions. But most of the small farms that I work with have a lot of challenges implementing the pasture management recommendations that I give them. A lot of times it's because of equipment or availability. So tonight I'm going to go through some of the common challenges that I have come up with or that I've seen and the solutions we've come up with. If we can get this rolling, there we go. We're going to talk a very, very little bit about pasture management basics. I do not have time, unfortunately, to jump into all of pasture management. That could be, a 2-hour talk on its own. I will spend a little bit more time on rotational grazing and a couple of minutes on how we can actually take these recommendations and use equipment on a small farm specifically. Maybe we rent it, maybe we buy it, maybe we hire somebody, but like what equipment is out there that you should be thinking about? All right, to start off with, I believe that all farms, large or small, should be thinking about managing their pastures for numerous reasons. The first one being feed value. A well-managed, productive pasture can provide so much feed value. Think calories, energy, protein for horses. In fact, sometimes it's way too much. If you've got these fat ponies or metabolic laminitic horses, these pastures, these highly managed productive pastures might actually be too much. And the question then becomes, do we put them out on a poorly managed, neglected pasture, or do we keep them on a dry lot? So my opinion is that we should be looking at dry lots instead of just neglecting our pastures if we do have those horses. And part of the reason for that is that poorly managed pastures do become an environmental risk, specifically to water quality. So having a nice thick stand of grass, forages, legumes, even weeds sometimes helps to filter water that can get contaminated by various things in our pastures. So think soil from erosion, right? If we have a lot of bare ground, we have a lot of erosion going on. We're losing our valuable topsoil, and that soil is flowing into water bodies and polluting them. Same with nutrients from horse manure, right? So making sure to manage our pastures, at least to have good, thick vegetation, is key in environmental protection, especially in our watersheds. Here's my really brief slide on what I consider the top keys to good pasture management on horse farms. And you can see that these all have arrows in between them because they're really all interconnected. My first one on top is soil fertility. So just like we put a ton of effort and time into making sure our horses' diets are balanced, they're getting the right ratio of nutrients, we need to do the same for our pasture forages if we want them to thrive and be productive. So getting those soil tests done, here we recommend every 3 years, making sure we're applying proper fertilizer. In our area, our soils tend to acidify over time. So every 3 years, we would apply some lime to get that acidity back into a nice neutral level. I know that's not the case everywhere in the country, but that's one of the things we deal with here. And I would recommend talking to your local extension office if you're looking for more local recommendations. Weed control is another big one. I don't think that a couple of weeds in a pasture is a problem. It's super normal. It becomes a problem when the weeds start taking over areas of the pasture and competing out the grasses and the good legumes that our horses should be eating, or if the weeds are toxic, which we'll hear some more about later tonight. So there's a lot of things that you can do for weed control. It doesn't necessarily mean just reaching for the herbicide, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. Mowing, I think, is really important for pasture management for a number of reasons. Number one, it just looks nice, right? Our pastures are a little bit more even and beautiful, but it's also great for grasses. They like being mowed. It helps to thicken the stand. It helps to get sunlight down into the canopy. Also, weeds don't like being mowed. So in some cases, regular mowing can be a good form of weed control. And finally, I have grazing management, which is controlling when and where your animals are grazing. So in our area, so think, temperate climates, improved pastures, the recommendation is that you need 2 to 4 acres per horse so that those horses can get all of the nutrition they need from pastures and you don't overgraze the pastures and ruin them. 2 to 4 acres per horse. That's a lot. I don't see that in my area. And if we're talking out west where it's more rangeland, those numbers are going to be even bigger. Maybe it'll be 10 acres per horse, right? So the way to make more efficient use of smaller acreages is to manage that grazing. Maybe it means only grazing your horses for half the day, or maybe it means coming up with some more intensive grazing systems. And here is where I plug in my absolute favorite grazing management system, rotational grazing. In my opinion, this is how you graze small acreages. It allows you to take small areas and they grow, and then you graze them, and then they regrow. So you're just getting so much forage from a small area. So I have a little video here, which I'm going to play, which will introduce this.
What is rotational grazing, and how can it help your horse farm? Rotational grazing is when you rotate a group of horses through a system of 2 or more paddocks. The key concept of this grazing system is that horses only graze one paddock at a time, which lets the other paddocks regrow for a few weeks. This grazing system is much more efficient than keeping horses in the same pastures all the time. They graze more uniformly in smaller paddocks. It helps to prevent overgrazing, and the rest periods mean more grass is available for your horses. Rotational grazing is a great way to get the most forage out of a small area. What is rotation?
Right. So that sort of introduces what rotational grazing is. If you haven't heard of it before, I'm sure if you've attended many of these Rutgers seminars, you've definitely heard of it before. A couple of guidelines as to how you might use a system like this. We want our horses to be grazing for 7 days or less on each of those sub paddocks, right? Those individual grazing units. That's about how long it takes for the grasses to start their regrowth. And we don't want the horses grazing the regrowth right away. We want that regrowth to have a couple of weeks, several weeks of rest to recover and regrow up to some designated starting height. Maybe it's 6 inches of grass, maybe it's 8 inches of grass, whatever you decide. And then we don't regraze until our forage has reached that ideal height. So the next questions that usually come up are, okay, how do you lay out these systems? How big does each unit need to be per horse? How many units do I need to have? So with the next couple of slides, we're going to go through some rough calculations that can help with decision making. If you hate math, you can just zone out for a couple minutes. But I have some spreadsheets and some equations that we can use, or you don't even have to use them. You can just wing it. But I just wanted to present this information. Before I get to my equations, here's just a couple ways you can lay out a rotational grazing system. The first one was in the video. You just take one pasture and you subdivide it into multiple units. So you can see here, can you? Yes. We've taken this one pasture, divided it into 4 grazing units, and we carved out the center to be a sacrifice slot. Weird name, but we are sacrificing the forage in that lot to preserve the forage in the pastures around it. So in this central sacrifice lot, we have the horse's shelter, the horse's water, hay feeders, whatever you need. And the key here is that we only need one of these items instead of 4 to have 4 grazing units. So we don't need a shed in each paddock. We don't need a waterer in each paddock. All we do is when we're grazing paddock number 1, we keep the gate open to the sacrifice lot and we close the gates to the other paddocks. So it's a very efficient way to use this land without having to, pay for multiple sheds and waterers. But not everybody has a perfectly rectangular property or pasture. So I wanted to show you a couple of other ways you can lay out a system like this. This first one is more of a radial design. So maybe this is somebody's whole property. They've got their home site, the road is over here, and in the center is the sacrifice lot with the barn, the water, and everything else. And they have this sacrifice lot open up into several different pastures, sort of like spokes off a wheel is how the fencing would be set up. And I think a lot of us, just from experience in the industry, would say, oh, great, 4 pastures. I can put 3 horses on each of those pastures. And sure, you could, depending on the size of these pastures, you might overgraze them. So in the rotational grazing system, you would take a group of horses and you would put them all on the first pasture and then all on the second pasture instead. So this is how we really get that good grazing out of a situation like this. You also might be thinking, okay, well, I've got an automatic waterer that's not going anywhere. I've got a big shed that can't be moved and it's nowhere near my grazing areas. So this picture is to show you that you can use laneways to get your horses from the sacrifice lot to each of your grazing units. And again, the benefit here is that you only need one shed and waterer, and that rotating the horses is as simple as opening one gate and closing another, right? You don't have to hand lead all your horses all over your property. Finally, you might be thinking, well, I've got 2 or 3 groups of horses and I could never combine them into one group for rotational grazing. They would kill each other, right? We don't want that. So this last map is actually of the Riders Lane farm at Rutgers, and this is to show you that you can create several separate rotational grazing systems on one farm. So in the lower right-hand corner over here, we have sort of that rectangular pasture that has its sacrifice lot on one edge and the radial design with the fencing. So we have 4 pastures coming off of this sacrifice lot. Up here in the upper left, our sacrifice lot, was stuck, right? We could not move this. There was an automatic waterer. There was a big giant shed that couldn't move. So we tried that laneway system to get the horses up to these far paddocks, and it worked great. The horses used them. They came in to drink. They came in to hang out in the shade, and they went all the way out here to eat. All right, so how do you start making decisions about designing these systems on a small farm? Choice number 1, wing it and see what happens. And it's a little bit of a joke, but it's also perfectly fine. Divide up your farm, draw it out on a map and see how it works, and go for it. There will be some trial and error with this kind of with any system, really. So I recommend using temporary electric fence for your subdivisions. This allows you to adjust as you go. So maybe you find that your horses are eating down one pasture in like 3 days, and another pasture, it takes them 15 days. So you can adjust that fence line to make one bigger and one smaller. But I am more of a detail-oriented person, and I want to do some calculations to at least get an idea of how well this is going to work on my farm with my situation. So we've got an equation that we can use that'll help us determine things like how big does each paddock need to be? How many paddocks do you need? How long can you graze them? Now, I want to point out before we start, these are 100% based on assumptions and estimates. So it's never going to be a perfect predictor of how it's going to work. But I just like to go in, especially when I'm making recommendations for people, I want to go in with a little bit more information. So we're going to use this equation and we're changing it around so that it tells us the size of the paddocks. If you're good with math, you can change around the different pieces here to tell you a lot of different things. So our overall equation is amount of forage needed by this group of horses divided by the available forage for this group of horses. So we'd primarily be looking at one of these paddocks in the system and figuring out how big each of those paddocks needs to be. All right, now let's look at the big theory equation. Amount of forage needed, you need to know the average weight of that group of horses. You need to know their daily feed intake. So if your horses are out 24/7, maybe you'll use 2% of their body weight. That's sort of the average number that we use in nutrition. Maybe they're only out 12 hours a day, right? So you might only use half of that. You need to know the number of horses in the group and the number of days you expect them to spend grazing that unit. Maybe we'll say 7 days is what we want to see. Then on the available forage side, we're going to divide it by some forage yield. This is difficult, right? We don't harvest our forage, so how do we know what it yields? We're going to have to use estimates. And the one that I like to use is pounds of forage in dry matter, right? So if all the water was sucked out, pounds of forage per inch of height per acre. So the range that I'm looking at here would be anywhere between 100 and 400 pounds per inch per acre. And again, these would be for improved pastures, not necessarily rangeland, but improved pastures where we've got thick, productive grasses, right? So if it's pretty sparse and there's bare ground and it's just not a very dense stand, you might be estimating closer on the 100 side. If it's a really, really thick stand of grass and pasture and forages, you can't see any bare ground in between them, it might be closer to 400. The next item is starting forage height. Okay, so we need to know that to calculate the forage yield. So maybe you will say, I want to start grazing when the forage has reached 6 inches in height or 8 inches in height, right? 6 inches isn't very much. It's the height of my hand. I do have small hands, so. And then finally, forage utilization. So if you've heard our presentations before, this is the take half, leave half rule. We do not want our horses to eat 100% of the grass plant, right? That doesn't leave any plant to recover and grow new leaves. It's going to take so much longer to recover if you let them eat more than half of the plant's height. So I usually use 50% here, which is to say this is the take half, leave half rule. We only let the horses eat 50% of the grass height before we rotate them. All right. Now, if that was all way too much and you hated it, I'm more of a spreadsheet girl. So I took those equations and I stuck them into a spreadsheet. So I can just play with the different cells and have it spit out the numbers at me. So if anybody would like this spreadsheet, let me know. My contact information is at the end of this presentation and I can send it to you. So on the left-hand side here, we have the forage needs, or the top part of the equation. And on the right-hand side, we have forage ability. And this is, again, per individual paddock. So the numbers that I've put in here are to tell you about one horse so that you can kind of take this information and say, all right, I have 6 horses, I'll multiply this by 6. everything is super average. Again, you can play with these numbers based on your situation on your farm. No two farms will be the same. But I said, okay, for one horse who weighs 1,100 pounds, he's out 24 hours a day, so he's going to eat a full 2% of his body weight on pasture. And I want the grazing period to be 7 days so that every Saturday I can just go and rotate. On the forage availability side, I'm estimating a good moderate 250 pounds per inch per acre on that yield. I'm saying I'll start grazing when the forage is 6 inches high. Again, that 0.5, right? 50% take half, leave half goes in here. And then I played with this number, this acreage, until my two yellow numbers, 150 and 154, were roughly the same. And so this is how I determined that in this very average scenario, each horse needs about 0.2 acres in each of these paddocks, right? So paddock 1 would be 0.2 acres per horse. So it's not going to hold true for every farm, but I just wanted to give you that like really average. This is how much land a horse needs to do rotational grazing. It's not very much. It's roughly 90 by 90 feet. So let's take those assumptions and do an example real world scenario. Again, we're just going to assume everything was the same as the last slide, except now I have 4 horses and 3 acres of turnout. So how can I turn that into a rotational grazing system? We established that 7 days of grazing on this farm requires 0.2 acres per horse times 4 horses means we will need 0.8 acres per paddock. Again, we've got 4 paddocks in this situation. Can we do it? We take 3 acres, we divide it by 0.8 acres per paddock, and we find out that we can do 3 paddocks of this size with 0.75 acres left over. That's almost a whole nother paddock. So 2 options that I see here. Maybe we want some extra space on this farm. Maybe we've got some mini donkeys or some miniature horses that really don't need this much grass. So maybe we want that extra 0.75 acres for a dry lot. So we take our grazing land, we split it into the 3 0.8 acre paddocks, and we keep the rest for a dry lot. Or maybe we don't have those mini donkeys, and instead we take the whole 3 acres and we split it into 4 0.75 acre paddocks, right? Maybe because they're slightly smaller than the calculations tell us, we can graze them a little bit shorter, but maybe not. This is going to be a try it and see, trial and error kind of a thing. But this is how you can use these equations to roughly estimate how well it's going to work on your farm. A couple of tips when we're thinking about implementing something like this on our farm. As I said, I just gave you a little bit of introduction to how the numbers look, but this will be unique to each farm. In some cases, you have to be super creative to make it work on your farm. It's usually possible. I also want to point out, again, that these calculations are guidelines. Of course, they're going to vary quite a bit, but also, if your calculator spits out that your 10 yearlings only need a quarter of an acre, maybe we need to be a little logical about this too, right? Be practical. If you've got a bunch of rambunctious horses, they may need more space than what it would take to feed them, okay? Because that's what the calculator is telling you. How much space do you need to feed them? Again, use trial and error, right? You will find that you need to adjust some fence lines. So I really like that temporary electric tape as our subdividers. But I do want to see really good solid perimeter fencing for the whole system. This isn't based on a strict schedule. You know, we're estimating 7 days to graze, but that recovery period is going to vary quite a bit depending on what season you're in. So maybe in the spring, you'll only need 3 weeks for the pastures to recover. And in the summer, you need 8 weeks for the pastures to recover. So make sure you're out there looking at the pastures and monitoring when you make your grazing decisions. And if you are looking at all of this going, no way, this is way too complex, I don't even want to think about this, You can make a difference by simply dividing one pasture in half, and you'll graze one half for 7 days, rest the other half, and then switch, right? So even that short 1 week rest can help, and you don't have to redesign your entire farm. All right, moving on from rotational grazing, let's talk a little bit about how we can manage these farms. Here's my recommended pasture management tasks for my area and for really the Northeast area, and what frequency we might be doing these. And that can help inform what equipment we need and what we might want to buy versus rent or hire. So to start, I already mentioned, I think mowing, regular mowing is super important. Depending on your grass growth, every 4 to 6 weeks, probably, right? Maybe in the summer, grass growth slows down, so we don't need to do it as often, but we do still want to control those weeds by chopping off the tops every now and then. Liming, right? Not all areas of the country will need to lime, but in our area, we recommend every 3 years or so to neutralize soil acidity. Fertilizing, your soil test results will give you annual recommendations for what to put down every year. Sometimes you might even do it twice a year. Weed control is on an as needed basis. So again, just taking better care of your pastures, making sure your soil fertility is good, and mowing regularly will do a lot for weed control. But when you have those problem weeds, then you might need to think about spraying an herbicide. Dragging manure is fully optional. This one is a little bit more contentious with the parasite issues that we've been seeing, but we'll talk a little bit about that. And then finally, overseeding is when you're adding seed or planting seed into an existing stand of grass. So this might be something you do when your grass stand starts to thin out a little bit. Grass doesn't live forever. The stands naturally thin after you plant them within, 3, 5, 8 years, depending on how well you take care of them. So this is going to be an as needed item, but if you start to notice that your pastures are thinning, it's a good idea to try and overseed. Here's the big question. Okay, that's great, but how? How can I make this happen on my tiny 2-acre farm? So 3 options that I've come up with. If you have other options, please tell us about them. That would be great. Number 1, hire somebody to come in and do the work for you. Number 2, buy the equipment and do the work yourself. This equipment is not cheap, so maybe you might consider going in with a friend or a neighbor to purchase the equipment and share it between yourselves. Or try to rent the equipment. Maybe there's an equipment dealer in your area that you could rent something like this from. Maybe your county soil conservation district has equipment for rent. With both buying and renting, you need to be very careful that you have the right equipment or the right vehicle to tow the equipment you want to use. And we'll talk about that as well. And I'll point out, I'm not an equipment expert here, so this is just the stuff that I've picked up over the last couple of years. A couple of notes on hiring someone to come in and do this work for your pastures. A lot of times, the obvious choice is these agricultural chemical companies that will come out to the grain farms in your area. And, maybe they'll do fertilizer, lime, and herbicides on the corn farms and the soybean farms, right? So they're already in the area. These can be tricky because they're typically expecting to do large, 90-acre fields, and they have equipment that works well on 90-acre fields. So if they come in with a 12-foot wide tractor, is it going to fit through your 8-foot wide gate? Are you going to have to disassemble your fence for them to get through? If you have a 1/4-acre pasture, is the equipment even going to be able to navigate around the corners? Can it get through your laneways? So these are logistics to think about before you pull the trigger on this. Local farmers in your area could be another option. Maybe there's a farm down the road and he's got equipment that they can help you with your own pastures. Again, the size of the equipment could be an issue. Finally, I've had some people exhaust all of their other options. They can't get anybody to help them. In this case, you could look into landscaping companies. Um, I would say lawn management and pasture management are both very different and not that different at the same time. So just be aware that they will automatically want to treat your pasture like a lawn, and it is not a lawn. So you'll have to be very specific and clear with any instructions you give them. For instance, if you want their help reseeding, don't let them plant lawn seed into your pasture. It's not intended to be grazed. It's not going to do very well. Maybe you provide your own seed in that case. I typically would not let them apply any herbicides on your pastures. Again, lawn herbicides are different from pasture herbicides. They may have the same active ingredient and they might be very, very similar, but those inert ingredients in lawn and turf herbicides are not intended to be grazed by animals, right? So whether this company has even the licenses and the certifications to apply pasture herbicides, don't know. So I would stay away from having a lawn company do herbicides on your pasture. The biggest drawback with hiring somebody is that everything's going to be done on their schedule, especially if you do end up going with a large ag chemical company. You know, they are used to working with these big, big farms. Those are their primary clients. So your little, 2-acre horse farm might fall to the bottom of their list, and things might not get done at the exact optimal time of year. If you're thinking of buying or renting your own equipment, there's just a couple questions that you need to go through to help you figure out what you want to buy, what you want to rent, and will it even work for you, right? So to start off with, what do you already have? Do you have an ATV? Do you have a garden tractor? What connections does it have? What's its horsepower? Does the implement you want to use require more horsepower than your garden tractor has, right? Can you use hydraulics? Does it have a power takeoff shaft, right? So these are all things you'll need to think about when you are looking at equipment. What's your acreage? If you get a mower that can mow a 5-foot swath at a time and you have 8 acres to do that way, that's going to take a while, right? So do you have the time to do this on your own with small equipment? Or should you have somebody come in and do it for you? Or do you need to be looking for wider equipment? And the other thing that I've already touched on is how frequently will you need this implement, right? A mower, as I'll touch on, you need it pretty frequently. But that overseeder, if you only need it every 5 years and it's really, really expensive, maybe you don't need to buy it. Maybe you can borrow or rent one. Benefits of doing it this way are that you can do everything on your own schedule, right? If you have a busy weekend, you can just do it the next weekend. It also lets you stagger some of these activities so that you always have grazing space available. Maybe you want to put down some fertilizer and then wait until a rainfall before you do the next field, right? So it just allows you to be a little bit more flexible with your grazing space. So here is what I consider must-have equipment that is really, really helpful for a farm to be able to manage their own pastures. Mower. You're using it so frequently that I think you should have your own. Your options would be a ride-on mower, like the one you see up in the upper right here. I see a lot of people using zero-turn mowers. They really like those. Or a pull-behind mower. So these can be a little bit wider. Again, you just have to make sure you know what the specifics are on that implement so that you know whether your towing vehicle will work. Even if it doesn't have a power takeoff, you can get a mower that is self-powered and maybe you power it with gasoline or something and you just pull it behind your ATV. So there are a lot of options out there. You just have to make sure you pick the right one. And also, if you do end up with a lawn mower, like a ride-on lawn mower, make sure that its mowing height can be raised to be about 4 or 5 inches, right? We're not treating our pasture like a lawn and mowing it at 2 inches. All right, so here's my recommended equipment that is helpful to have, but you don't absolutely need it. It should be easy enough to find, to rent, or borrow. A fertilizer spreader. This is something, if you really want to take care of your soil fertility, you might be doing this every year, twice a year. This cone spreader that you see up here, this is just a spinner spreader, and it broadcasts the fertilizer, this dry granular fertilizer, throughout your pasture. And you can get big ones that you pull with a tractor, or you can get little ones like this one that go behind an ATV. Now, if you end up wanting to spray herbicides, you're going to need some sort of a liquid sprayer. Pretty much all herbicides that are labeled for pasture use are intended to be sprayed as a liquid, right? So you can't use your spinner spreader up here to spray the herbicide. And I have so much to say about herbicides and no time, so I'm going to leave it at the label is the law. You need to read that label on that herbicide very, very carefully. Make sure you select herbicides that are labeled for use on pastures, that are registered in your state to be used. If you do not follow the label instructions and something goes wrong, you are liable. That is what the label is the law means. I do have at the end of this presentation a fact sheet with a ton of information about safely applying herbicides to horse farms. So I would recommend, if you are interested in using herbicides for weed problems, that you check that out, because it's just a good starting place. As far as application equipment, you can get a relatively small, like 25-gallon sprayer, and mount it onto your vehicle. Maybe it's an ATV, something like that, and use it that way. So in this picture, we have somebody with a small tank and a single nozzle sprayer. So she's just using it for the fence lines. But you can also find a small tank with more of a boom sprayer that has multiple nozzles that spread out and do a little bit wider of a swath. Finally, if you want to drag your pastures, this helps to break up the manure piles. It can spread out the nutrients from manure more evenly across the field than how horses like to just sort of put them in one spot and leave them there. This does create complications with your deworming protocols, because now you spread the worm larvae all the way out through the field and the horses can't avoid them anymore. So if you are interested in dragging your fields, make sure you are on the most up-to-date and accurate deworming protocol that is available on the AAEP website, American Association of Equine Practitioners. Talk to your vet about it, right? Always work with your vet in matters of deworming. Drags and harrows, you can make your own with a bit of chain link fence and some tires to weigh it down, or you can buy a more fancy one like this. You can see it has little tines that can actually scratch up the surface and do a little bit of light tillage as well, which can be helpful for seeding. All right, some pasture activities that I would suggest you rent or hire instead of trying to buy yourself. If you're in an area of the country that needs lime is usually going to be needed in tons per acre, not pounds per acre. So the lime carts are typically really big. They may not fit through your gates. So there's a lot of logistics to figure out with the lime truck. There are some other options, but you may want to ask around and see how other farms in your area are doing this. Seeding or drilling, this is how we overseed. So you can walk it around like this guy here. He's got like a chest-mounted spinner spreader for his grass seed. Not going to be the most effective and the most successful seeding, because that seed wants to be in contact with the soil. It wants to be fully surrounded. It wants to be planted about a 1/4 inch deep into the soil, right? So if we just stick it on the surface, it's not quite as happy as if we use some equipment like this to actually plant the seed at the right depth. So we've got a no-till drill. This cuts a little slit in the soil, drops seeds in, and then covers it up again. We've got a Brilliant seeder, which uses like a cultipacker, like a roller, to press the seeds gently into the soil after they've been placed. Lots of options, and it is very, very important to check all the specifications before you borrow or rent one of these. Make sure your tractor has the right horsepower, it has the hydraulics needed to tow one of these things. All right, I'm just about out of time. So here are my take-home messages. I think that all horse farms, large or small, should be managing their pastures, especially for environmental reasons. Rotational grazing is a really great management practice, grazing management, to make really efficient use of small acreage. Think about all the things we just talked about to help you decide which equipment you want to buy, borrow, rent, or hire. And finally, think very carefully about the towing vehicle that you have and the size limitations of your farm, whether it be small laneways, narrow gates, or even very small pastures. Here are the recommended articles from our website. Of course, Rutgers has a lot of articles as well, and you can find about 1 million pasture management articles on our Penn State Extension website. There's also a great textbook that has come out in the last couple of years that covers all aspects of horse pasture management. And down here is the herbicide link. So I can drop those in the chat a little bit later. All right, so that wraps it up. And if we have time for questions, Dr. Williams, I'd be happy to take any.
Yeah, we definitely do, Laura. We've got a lot of great ones coming in. So thank you very much for that. Let's give Laura a big virtual round of applause before I roll into some questions. It looks like a lot of the questions are really focused on rotational grazing, on mowing, on those sorts of things. So before we actually get to that, do you want to stop sharing your screen so that everybody can see you, and then we'll go ahead. You can turn on your video. Yep, there we go. First one, let's take this one because this is really interesting. Multi-species grazing. So is it better if rotating with other animals to best have them either before or after or together at the same time if you're, say, doing goats or cows with horses?
So my personal opinion on this one is that horses tend to be the most picky grazers if you're going to be following different groups of animals. So horses tend to want the grass more than the forbs and the other stuff that like ruminants might want to eat. So my personal preference would be to let the horses graze first, let them get the grass, and ignore all the other stuff, and then have your goats come in after, and they can eat the stuff that the horses left behind. Of course, they'll eat grass too. You know, they'll love that as well. One way to do it. I also like multi-species grazing as a parasite control. It's not a full parasite control method, but it's great to sort of have the goats eat the horse parasites and the horse eat the goat parasites, and then they're not there to infect each other. It's not the only method you should use by far, but it's one tool in the toolbox.
Awesome. Thank you. We have a couple about rest periods. So first, rest period after fertilizing. How long do you need to leave them? And then rest period after mowing. How long do you have to feed them? So, or leave them pastures rested. So fertilizing versus mowing.
Yep. So after fertilizing, I do want to be a little careful that we don't put the horses out and let them eat that fertilizer. Usually it's just going to be sticking to the leaves, and a light rainfall, like a ½ inch of rain, will just wash it off of the leaves and into the soil. So if there's a ½ inch rain in your future, that's a good way to, make sure there's no fertilizer left on those leaves. Otherwise, you can give it a week or two and just go out and look at it. And if you still see fertilizer dust on the leaves of the grass, give it a little bit longer. As far as mowing, usually you don't need to leave horses off after mowing. If you're going from 3 feet of forage down to 6 inches of forage, yeah, sure, you're going to have some really big piles of grass that might be wet, they might warm up, they might be gross. So you may want to think about, either dragging them around to spread them out and let them dry out before, so that the horses don't eat that warm chunk of forage that's sitting there that might mold at the bottom. That's what we're trying to avoid. But if you're going from 10 inches of grass down to 6 inches of grass, I'm not worried about the clippings. they're going to dry out on their own and they'll be just like hay.
So you pretty much always recommend mowing down to about 6 inches?
I would say the minimum I'd want to mow down to is 3 or 4 inches, never lower than that. So if you're doing a rotational grazing system and you pull the horses off when they've grazed down to 3 inches or 4 inches, then you can mow the rest of the pasture down to that length or height and let it all recover from the same height. But if you aren't doing rotational grazing and you just want to keep your pasture in good shape, 6 inches is great, 4 inches is fine, just no lower than that.
So here's one more rest question. We did fertilizer, we did mowing. Now what about herbicides? How long to rest
Yes.
herbicides?
So that is one of my label notes, that every label will tell you how long you need to keep grazing animals off after you've applied it. Most, at least in Pennsylvania, most of the pasture herbicides available have a 0-day grazing restriction, meaning you could put the horses back out the same day once it's dried. A lot of times I will recommend at least waiting until the weeds have died before you put the horses back out. Sometimes when weeds are wilting, they taste better to horses. So if you've got toxic weeds out there, I would want them to be fully dead before I put the horses back out.
Good point. So a few more. We've got lots of great questions coming in, so keep them coming, guys. Couple questions on the paddock paradise system or track system, whatever there's 1,000 names for it. What are your thoughts on that? And are there any special considerations for incorporating rotational grazing along with the track system?
I think those are so cool. I haven't really seen any research on them to tell me one way or another. So I think they're really neat. I'm not sure if they really give the horses more exercise than if they were just turned out normally. The idea here is that you would make a track for the horses. You'd sort of replace the dry lot with a track that would go maybe around the perimeter of the farm, or you could, zigzag it around, but you would lay out water, hay bags, the horses, the stuff that they want to get to, you'd spread that out around the track so that they're constantly moving between where they're eating. It's a great thing for horses that can't graze, maybe metabolic horses. I think it's really cool. I think it can work well with rotational grazing if you have the track on the perimeter of your property and then you subdivide the interior into different grazing units. And so that could be one way to do both.
Good answer. Yeah, I know. I've seen some work, but yeah, don't have enough experience there either. So great. A couple of questions on dragging. So is there a certain time of year to drag the fields? And what about people that have vacuums and want to vacuum the manure? How often should they do that? Or do you just recommend dragging before resting instead of dealing with any of that?
Okay, lots to address there. As far as picking up manure with the vacuum or the scraper, whatever you call it, if you're doing that for parasite reasons, depending on the weather conditions, it takes parasites between 4 and 7 days usually to go from an egg to an infective larvae during ideal conditions. And by parasites, I'm specifically talking about small strongyles. So if you are trying to reduce infection levels or transmission levels by removing manure, you should do it between 3 and 7 days. So that would be my recommendation if that's why you're removing manure. As far as dragging, this one's a tough one. So here in Pennsylvania, things are different down south where it gets really hot. But in Pennsylvania, if you want to kill parasites by dragging, you're going to need to spread out the manure piles, and then they need to sit in the heat of about 104 degrees or more for several days to actually kill those parasite larvae and eggs. Do we get that in Pennsylvania, New Jersey? No, not really. Maybe down south, that could be more of an option for reducing the parasite burden on the pastures. In our area, not so much. So if you want to really do things by the book and follow the AAEP guidelines, it'll say, once you drag a pasture, don't put horses out for the rest of the grazing season.
Ooh. Yep.
It's not practical. So, I think if you are following that surveillance-based deworming and you're keeping an eye on all of your horses and you really want to drag for fertilizer purposes, spread those nutrients out, you could. Just make sure you talk to your veterinarian about it.
Good answers to some tough questions. Still got more coming in. I'll take a few more questions. So what about time of year for liming and fertilizing? And does that differ? There was different questions. Some said lime, some said fertilize, but what's the best time of year to do these sorts of things on your pasture?
All right. And so again, keep in mind, I will be answering these for the Northeast climate. If you're in a very different part of the country, please talk to your local extension agent. Liming can be done pretty much anytime you can get on the ground, on the soil. So, don't run a tractor over your pasture when it's soggy and muddy. That'll destroy your soil. A lot of people lime in the fall because they plan to do reseeding and that kind of thing in the spring. But lime takes a while to work its way in the soil, especially in pasture situations where we're just spreading it on the ground and waiting for it to get into the root zone. It takes a good 6 months to a year to actually neutralize that soil acidity. So you can really do it pretty much any time, as long as, if you are thinking about adding new seed, you'll want to back it off. And by that, I mean, apply the lime at least 6 months to 12 months before you seed, right? So there's a lot of planning that goes into this pasture management. Fertilizer is a little bit more specific. You'll want to apply that fertilizer during the growing season when the grasses are actively growing and can take up the nutrients that you're putting down, right? So most fertilizer has nitrogen, phosphorus, and or potassium. That's our NPK, or our 10-10-10. Nitrogen is even more finicky. This should only be applied when grasses are actively growing. So in our region, that's the spring and the fall when we get our flushes of growth, right? And that nitrogen does give you a nice flush of leafy dark green growth, versus potassium and phosphorus. They can be put down pretty much any time during the growing season. They will build up in the soil, right? So the nitrogen will flush out of the soil. If you put it down when the grasses can't use it, it's constantly changing forms and going with the water. So nitrogen when grasses are actively growing, phosphorus and potassium pretty much any time during the grazing season. Just don't put it down during the winter when there's nothing to take it up.
Awesome. Well, I think I'm going to just do one more, hopefully quick question. And then if you don't mind staying on and attending to some of the questions we didn't get to in the Q&A, that would be great. So someone asked about what kind of seed would you use to reseed a field and a pasture? And again, I realize this is more of a Northeast sort of answer, but can you give that recommendation?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to be talking about cool season grasses. So this is for really the top stripe of the country down to about, I guess the bottom of Pennsylvania is where the transition zone starts. And then underneath of that, we have warm season grasses. So I'm not as familiar with those, but we do have some people on the call that might be. So for cool season grasses in pastures, I really like Kentucky bluegrass as a base. It's more of a less productive grass. It doesn't get as tall, but it spreads out and it's really nice for horse pastures. And then for the more productive grasses, you could put in orchard grass, you could put in brome grass, novel, endophyte, tall fescue. Lots of words there, but that's specific varieties of tall fescue have different issues with them. So the one that I like the most is novel, endophyte, tall fescue. No health issues for horses, if you are familiar. Perennial ryegrass is another one that I see in a lot of pasture mixes. I usually don't recommend Timothy, not because there's anything wrong with it. Horses love it, but because it doesn't like being grazed as much as it likes being cut for hay. So those are sort of my big, I don't know, what was that, 5, 6 that I like to see in a pasture mix. And I do prefer a mix to a monoculture.
Awesome. Well done. Let's thank Laura again. I think that was a lot of great information. I didn't get to all of her questions, but like she said, she will be able to log on and go ahead and just answer those in the Q&A box, because I do want to move on. We've got actually 3 great speakers coming up, and they're all going to go ahead and share the next 50 minutes. So if Dr. Krishona Martinson would come on and go ahead and share her screen and presentation, I'm going to go ahead and give the introduction for all of our next speakers. So what I really wanted the next group of speakers to do was talk about toxic plants to horses, but realizing that we get a very nationwide audience. So I wanted some to cover the north, some to cover the south, and maybe some to cover some hay as well. So I had a couple of colleagues of mine who said they would be able to chip in and kind of tag team this presentation. So the first speaker, and she's going to actually run the PowerPoint for everybody, so bear with her as we do slide changes, is Dr. Krishona Martinson. She holds a bachelor's, master's, and PhD in agronomy, so a very, very appropriate speaker for tonight. She got her bachelor's from UW River Falls, so that's University of Wisconsin, River Falls. And then her master's and PhD from the University of Minnesota. And she has been the extension specialist and in the Department of Animal Science at the University of Minnesota since 2008. And she's recently been promoted to full professor in 2018. Also, along with her family, Dr. Martinson owns and operates Leaning Pine Farm in Martinson's Herefords. These entities include horses shown in timed events, registered and commercial Hereford beef cattle, and direct marketing cattle to the local community. So we'll welcome Krishona. So we also here have Dr. Betsy Greene. She is the state extension specialist and has been a state extension specialist for over 30 years. And she has an extensive track record in creating, disseminating, publishing, and presenting research-based educational material for both livestock and equine in management, stewardship, and biosecurity. So right now she is at the University of Arizona and is going to be talking to us about some of these pesky southern weeds. She and a colleague also developed the hands-on scrub laboratory curriculum, which is Science Creates Real Understanding of Biosecurity, which is a national project. And joining both of them is Anita Thompson, who is an assistant area agent for the University of Arizona Cooperative Extension, and she covers the Navajo and Apache counties. She works primarily with small and family farms and ranches, helping them operate their business. She also mainly works with small ruminants and equine, and is always around her favorite animals. Unfortunately, she says toxic plants have always been a major issue affecting horses in the arid lands of Arizona. So she has a lot of information that she's going to share with us today about these plants. So without further ado, I'm going to invite everybody to also continue to ask questions in the Q&A. When the speakers are all done, I'm going to open it up to the whole panel to go ahead and answer questions. So I'm going to go ahead and mute and turn off my camera and turn it over to Dr. Martinson.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. It's great to be here, and I thought Laura did a great job. So I'm going to start us out today talking about plants, poisonous plants that we find in hay, and I'm just going to focus on 3. And you might be thinking, oh, you're in Minnesota. How applicable is your hay to what we have if you're out of Minnesota? Well, hay is a highly traded commodity, and the upper Midwest tends to have a lot of forage, and it gets shipped everywhere. So we're just going to talk about 3 things that we commonly find in hay. We're going to talk about Horreolism, foxtails, and wild parsnip. So first of all, Laura did a great job. A well-managed hayfield can outcompete most weeds. The same things you would want to do to a pasture, you'd want to do to a hayfield, particularly cutting management, reducing wheel traffic, so only making traffic in the field when you have to, and then fertility. So those are the biggest things that you can do. The best thing and the good news here is that most weeds are not palatable and will be avoided. The problem is in a hay setting, horses can't easily sort as they can in a pasture. A lot of times in a pasture, we'll see horses grazing around, but like this picture shows, it's just harder to sort. And especially as hay nets have gained popularity, as they should, they're a great tool to have. It's even harder for horses to sort things out. So we just have to keep an eye on our hay and inspect it closely. The one thing I just wanted to share is that I think a lot of times people automatically assume they have a toxic plant. Well, it could be a variety of things. So what we need to do is if we suspect a toxic plant, first we have to have evidence of poisonous plant ingestion. And that means we find it in the hay, or we see a piece of it in a hay feeder, or maybe it's even hanging out of our horse's mouth. We have to make sure that the symptoms match. And then if possible, sometimes we know the toxin, we would want a diagnostic test to confirm that. Again, there's just a lot of different diseases that can mimic some of the symptoms we see with ingesting poisonous plants. But again, evidence of ingestion, symptoms, and a diagnostic test if available. So the first one is Horiolism. Horiolism is a perennial. It only impacts horses, which is sort of handy to know. Because if you have hay that's infected with Horiolism, it can be fed to cattle, small ruminants, goats, things like that. We do not know the toxin, although there have been various efforts historically to try to isolate it. And it really affects the musculoskeletal and the cardiovascular system. And it is an issue when it's grazed fresh, but again, the vast majority of horses will graze around it in a pasture setting. But again, it's that accidental ingestion that we see in hay. And what we normally see is stocking up. Sometimes the horses have fever, and if the horses become stressed, we can see that progress to laminitis. Stocking up is just swelling of a limb. And sometimes we also see that horses that are naive or that have never been exposed to it react more severely the first time. So quite honestly, in the upper Midwest, Horiolism is everywhere. It loves sandy soils. It loves drought. We're coming out of a few seasons of drought where that has been an issue for us. There's a lot of Horiolism. Some of the horses maybe have just been exposed to it, but when that Midwest hay gets shipped down south where they don't have Horiolism, or to areas where there's a heavier clay soil, Horiolism really only grows where it's sandy. And for those horses that are naive or never been exposed, we can see a much stronger reaction when they ingest Horiolism. So this picture, everybody always wants to see the picture of the weed in hay. And sometimes that's hard because we see just little pieces. But you can see here's a twine string, a red plastic twine string. And here's a Horiolism plant. It has these oval shaped seeds that turn to almost like a clear cellophane. And you'll see the individual little black seeds that are about the shape of a pinhead. So this is what it would look like in hay. It doesn't really look like any kind of beneficial legume like alfalfa or a clover, and it certainly doesn't look like grass. It's kind of spindly looking and sort of grayish green. The good thing is that for the vast majority of horses, if we remove the Horiolism, those clinical signs of, stocking up and fever will tend to gradually decrease over 2 to 4 days. And because we can't predict what horses, we estimate that about 75% of horses will have a reaction when they ingest Horiolism. We see the back limbs more commonly impacted, and for some reason, there's some research that even indicates geldings are more commonly impacted. Because of that, we sort of have a zero tolerance, because again, we can't predict what horses will and won't react to Horiolism. So death is very rare. This picture shows a very, very slight case of some general stocking up in a horse that had eaten some Horiolism. But again, we have seen cases of death with those horses that are naive or have never experienced before. We also have seen these symptoms progress to laminitis or founder. And again, it's when horses are stressed. So usually if we see this, sometimes horse owners panic. They throw the horse in a trailer to haul them to a veterinarian. That stress of being hauled can sometimes, result in that progression towards laminitis. So if you suspect horiolism, it is best to keep your horse on site, keep their environment as normal as possible, keep the stress low, and then have your veterinarian come out and have supportive care. And most of these horses do clear up pretty well with some supportive care. So everyone always wants to know control options, and Laura did a really great job. You need to always read the herbicide label. Herbicides are labeled for a site, a pasture, a hayfield, a cornfield, a lawn. As Laura said, lawns are very different than hayfields and pastures. Herbicides labeled for hayfields and pastures will have those grazing restrictions, where lawns won't, because lawns aren't intended to be grazed. So again, horiolism is very common in sandy soils, especially after drought. And even if you didn't have it before drought, what drought does is kill the beneficial species. It opens up the ground. Weeds in general, about 80% of the seeds, and a lot of weeds are prolific seed producers, will germinate that next growing season, but that 20% sort of last indefinitely. That's their survival mechanism, and they emerge over time. So again, even if you didn't have it before you had a drought, there's probably some seeds just waiting for that opportunity. We want to follow those best management practices for a hayfield. That is timely mowing, making sure our fertility is up to par, reducing wheel traffic, and overseeding those thin spots. And of course, if we have it in our pasture, the same things apply, but also we want to add in that best management practices of not overgrazing, which Laura outlined really well how we can accomplish with a rotational grazing system. People always want products. If you have a grass hayfield, there is a product called dicamba. That is the active ingredient. There's many different commercial names of that. It works really well on horiolism and has very minimal grazing and harvest restrictions, usually less than 7 or 14 days. The only problem is, in the eyes of a herbicide, horiolism is a broadleaf, as are clovers and legumes. So if you have an alfalfa hayfield or a clover hayfield, you don't really have any options. If you have a mixed alfalfa or clover and grass hayfield, you don't really have any options. Your best options are to overseed and to try to do timely harvests of that hay. If you have really thick areas, a lot of times, kind of when you drive in and out of the field, maybe closer to a right-of-way or a ditch, you can control it with glyphosate. Glyphosate is the active ingredient commonly found in the product Roundup. I think most people know Roundup. But remember, Roundup kills anything that is green and actively growing. So that would result in you having to overseed or reseed that area. So you do have herbicide options. Always read the label. Must be labeled for a hayfield. Follow those harvest restrictions, and that herbicide can be sprayed, and then the hay can be harvested and safely fed to the horses. So our next one is foxtail. There are many different types of foxtail. Think of foxtails having many evil little cousins. Foxtail is an annual, and what is the issue is that this is a seed head of foxtail. A lot of people look at it as almost like a bottle brush cleaner. So it has those little spiky things, and these little spikes or awns hook into the seed, and where they hook into the seed, there's microscopic barbs. So when horses eat the foxtail seed heads, those barbs become lodged in the soft tissue of their mouth. So it isn't the stem or the leaf of a foxtail, and it isn't a chemical toxicity. It is more of a physical toxicity with those barbs becoming lodged in the horse's mouth. So it causes trauma mostly to that mouth, akin to the GI tract. What we'll see is lip and tongue ulcers. Foxtail, you guys, it's just everywhere. So practically speaking, we just want our hay to be less than 10% foxtail seed heads. And remember, it's only the seed heads. Here's a picture of barbs that have been embedded in the horse's soft tissue. You can just see those ulcers and how painful that would be, and how you can envision that this horse would be off of feed. So yes, they can get incredibly sore mouth ulcers when they eat foxtail seed heads. So foxtails are grass. If you have a grass hayfield, there are no herbicide options that you have. Because remember, in the eyes of a herbicide, you're either a grass or you're a broadleaf. Without genetic engineering, like having Roundup resistant soybeans or Roundup ready corn, it hasn't got that way. It hasn't really got into the forage market yet. So a grass is a grass. It doesn't matter if it's foxtail or a beneficial grass like orchard grass or brome grass. Again, it really likes sandy soils. It's very common in drought. It's also very common in new seeding. It's because these annual grasses just grow much quicker than our perennial forage grasses. So usually that first cutting after a new seeding, it's best to use that for something other than horses. And again, always follow those best management practices, timely cutting, fertilizing, overseeding those thin areas. And of course, in a pasture setting, where again, they'll mostly graze around it, we want to avoid overgrazing. But remember, it's only the seed heads. The foxtail leaf and stem doesn't cause any issue. So finally, wild parsnip, and then I will turn it over to my Arizona friends. So wild parsnip is a biennial. It is a problem in all grazing livestock and in humans, and it affects our skin. We know the toxic element, coumarins, and wild parsnip is an issue when it's grazed fresh and when it's dried in hay. And I can tell you that wild parsnip is not common in cultivated hayfields, but where we commonly see it is in road ditches or right-of-ways. And as you go from Minnesota west and in many parts of the upper Midwest, there's a significant amount of hay that is harvested from the rights-of-ways. We have much larger spaces in the Midwest and West than you all have on the East Coast. So the ditches and right-of-ways are harvested for a lot of horses and cattle. And again, we see it everywhere in Minnesota in the rights-of-ways. Here's just a picture, obviously a road, and there's wild parsnip living its best life here. If you are going to try to eradicate it, it will tend to creep in from fence lines or, road ditches into pastures and hayfields. You need to protect yourselves with gloves and long sleeve shirts. The coumarins actually interact with the UV sunlight, and it causes blisters on humans and blisters in horses. So you do need to protect yourself and make sure you don't get any of the plant material on your skin. So what we see is that severe sunburn or photosensitivity that is reduced if you can protect your horse or yourself. So keep them in a barn, keep them in a shaded area, keep yourself in the house. We obviously want to remove from source, and you would want to work with the local veterinarian if the lesions are bad enough. And sometimes people will also need help if they get into it. So again, we don't normally see it in hayfields that are well managed, that are cut timely, that are well fertilized, that have good populations, good plant stands of desirable forages, but very common in sort of areas that aren't as well managed, or especially those road ditches. So here's what we see in horses and humans. This horse here, we obviously commonly see photosensitivity on any white. So horses with a big white blaze, paints, Appaloosas, the white ponies, we see it wherever they're on their white legs, on their muzzle. So a lot of times people will say, my horse looks like it has acne. And obviously horses don't get acne, but that is that photosensitivity. And then here you can see on a human, just that severe photosensitivity on their arms. So it is something to not mess around with. So wild parsnip is a biennial, meaning in the first year, you will just see this rosette of leaves. A rosette of leaves is just a clump of leaves that grows in a circle close to the ground. The second year is when it bolts or sends up a stalk and has that big yellow flower that's shaped like an umbrella or an umbel. It is best to control wild parsnip in any biennials during that first year of growth. Again, dicamba works well, but it will also take out any alfalfa and clover that you purposely planted. We can also use Roundup, but of course that will kill all things green and growing. So that would definitely be an overseeding or a reseeding area. The other thing is just really watch the road ditches and fence lines. And again, for some of you, you might think I would never buy ditch hay or hay from the right of ways. It's just super common in lots of the country. So if you're in the West or a place where you know hay and it's mostly round bales are being harvested, just ask, just say, hey, did this happen to come from the right of way or ditch, or did it come from a cultivated field? You know, if you miss that herbicide application in that first year of growth and you don't see it until the second year of growth when it's sent up that stalk, it is best to mow it, let that plant regrow for a couple of weeks, and then try to use a herbicide. And again, if you follow the label, like Laura said, and I will echo this, and you follow those grazing restrictions and harvest restrictions, and the product is labeled for a hayfield or a pasture, it is safe to use. We do have some great resources, like Rutgers and Penn State. We have several website articles. We also have a poisonous plant book and then a poisonous plant poster that we sell. And the poster is sort of organized by the symptoms that the most common plants cause, and the book just expands. And these are really focused on the upper Midwest. I think they work great for the East. It would not nearly be enough of a source for my friends in Arizona. And speaking of that, I will turn it over to Betsy and Anita.
All right, well, I'm gonna start, and in the middle, you got the plants you just heard about, and you'll hear about some that we have major issues with down south in Arizona and beyond. But I'm gonna just talk to you about how do you know how much your horse got, what it got, how would it be affected, or anything like that. And so you can go ahead to the next one. A couple of things to think about. It always depends on several different things. Number one, the chemical nature of the toxin in the plant. So you heard about the photosensitivity. There's some other things that cause that. We actually had a news story in Vermont on the news that a horse had acid thrown on its face, and they come to find out when they did some examination, they found out that it was photosensitivity to some clover. I think Alcyone clover. So, you know, that could be very serious, from acne to major chemical looking burns. Also, the amount and the time period that the animal is eating these things. So maybe they just got some in the hay. Maybe that's a kind of one off. Maybe they're grazing on this. Maybe they have a taste for it. Maybe they also have nothing else to choose because you haven't followed Laura's recommendations from the first presentation. All of those things can come into play as well. And also parts of the plant eaten. And you'll hear about some things that are toxic. Well, just like the foxtail, you saw what that did to that mouth of that poor horse. And so that's just from the head of it, not from the stem area. And then condition and stage. You'll hear about some things from Anita that sometimes become very toxic depending on drought or monsoon, or just even stage of growth of the plant as well. And then whatever the environmental conditions are, I know that at times, whether it's turning cold and things, you know, can suddenly have shock to them because of the change in temperature. Not so much here, you know, the people think it's cold here, but down here it's not so much. And or as things are growing up as well. So anyways, other things, age, sex, size, general condition of the horse, all of those can come into play. But is the horse skinny and doesn't have a good immune system, they may be more susceptible. Are they young, very young, or very old? You know, all of these things can come into play depending on the health of the animal as well as what they have access to. Now, most horses don't tend to choose to eat toxic plants, but like as Krishona mentioned, if it's in the hay, they can't be as picky as they can be if it's out growing in the fields. Now, of course, you're talking about grazing in Arizona. A lot of times uh, there's not a whole lot of choice. So, okay, go ahead. So how do you know? Just an example, in Washington State, when I taught out there years and decades ago, literally, we had this row. It was an old barn yard and farm. It had a shed row in the back that had small pens off of it. All the horses were there. All of the horses were eaten, had access to the same stuff. One horse got severe mouth irritation and inflammation and almost like burns in their mouth. Well, the other horses had the same exact opportunity to eat whatever, but they did not like the mustard plant that horse had a very good taste for. So sometimes it's just a horse gets a taste for something that they shouldn't, or maybe the only option it has, or sometimes that's all they have to eat. So what do you have for available forage, whether that is plant life that's growing or hay that you provide them, or hay cubes or whatever? You need to be making sure that they have choices so that they're not stuck eating what's left, which is often the not so good stuff. And then one time at that same facility, we thought, okay, the horses are eating the fences kind of like it was like they were just grazing on the fences because it was old wood and it was very tasty. So we thought it would be great. And we put this like electric fence on the top where it was a triangle out. So it basically kept them off the boards. It wasn't like right up like you usually see with insulators tight. And all of a sudden we found out that we had to actually use weed eaters with gas and string when we didn't realize that we had weed eaters in the horses because they were eating everything in the pastures because it wasn't great pasture and we didn't have much for them to eat. So suddenly we made ourselves a new job, but it was probably better for their health not to be eating the stuff that was growing. Okay, go ahead. So just some general types. So cyanide, GI tract, nervous system, circulatory system. Different plants will have different impacts on these different systems. And of course, cyanide, wilting cherry leaves, wild cherry, and even the bark. Those were problems in Kentucky where they had all those beautiful old growth cherry trees. And then there were some major storms. Sudan grass, I think you hear about from Anita. And then even everybody knows that if you eat too many seeds or don't eat the peach seed and everything like that because it has cyanide, it's true. But wilting cherry leaves can actually, 2 fistfuls can kill a 1,000-pound horse. But if it's not that extreme on some of the others, based on what I just told you about how much they're eating, how often, how long, then it could just end up with damage to the urinary tract. Now, if it's something like cockleburr, nightshade, black locust, pokeweed, bittersweet, it's going to impact their gastrointestinal tract. And so if they're eating some of those, they may end up with no antidote and just death if they're eating large quantities or over long term. But if it's just a bite or something or exposure, they certainly can show colic symptoms as well. Nervous system, well, if it's Japanese U, usually the way that you diagnose is, as the vet would write, found dead, because Japanese U, those lovely little red what are they? Fruits have taxine, and that stops the heart. And unfortunately, it can be palatable to horses. And there's been people that have put up beautiful Japanese U wreaths on their horse stall walls and lost a horse or more. So food for thought. Also, water or poison hemlock, milkweed, tobacco, nightshade, all of these can cause nervous system signs, which I'll show you a little bit more. And then red maple can impact the circulatory system, as can wild onion. So we'll just take a quick look at some of those in the next slide. So if you have gastro or GI tract or gastrointestinal symptoms, everybody should know the colic signs: kicking at the abdomen, pawing, rolling, biting at the side or abdomen, swishing their tail, any general colic signs. So you have to figure out, as Krishona mentioned, whether this is they got some poisonous plants, they got some bad feed, they got into something. There's so many different things. And sometimes the poisonous plants aren't the things that people look to first. Sometimes people say this feed is bad, or this feed caused my horse to colic, when in fact you go out in their pasture and it's bare ground, or the only thing that's growing is toxic weeds. So be the detective and look around everywhere where your horse is environment if they're having some GI or several of your horses are having GI issues. Go walk the pasture, see what they're eating. Okay, next. And then some things that your vet may be doing, they may do a gastrointestinal lavage, or so putting fluids in, pumping them back out. They may do nasogastric intubation and put some mineral oil or activated charcoal down into the stomach to go through the GI tract to kind of either move things along or absorb toxins. It's all going to depend on what your horse is showing for symptoms and signs. And then next one too, last one for GI, they may also do provide some Banamine, whether it's IV or oral paste, for both the colic pain, but also potentially helping decrease the absorption of the toxins or endotoxins, depending on what your horse may be dealing with. Okay, next. And then, of course, neurological symptoms. You have ataxia. So that's kind of drunk walking, not having good balance, seizures, blindness, falling down. Who can tell me in the chat what nystagmus is? Anybody? I'll give you a minute real quick. And then trembling also is another neurological sign. Anybody? So nystagmus is when the eyes go side to side or up and down or in circular motion, like in an uneven or very random way. There you go, eyes shaking. Oh, there you go. Okay, eyes stagger, like a DUI test. Okay, yes, we'll have to test your horse for DUI. And hopefully it's not a DUI, but it could be a plant poisoning. All right, it looks like Laura looked it up. But good job, we got some people answering. Okay, so those would be some types of neurological symptoms. Go ahead. And then if it's a circulatory system issue, then you might see some bloody urine, jaundice, or yellowing. You might see weakness or unusual bleeding, or edema, which is swelling, or anemia. If you lift up and check your horse's gums and you see that they're pale and maybe dry, then that might be because their red blood cells are breaking down due to whatever they ate that was toxic. Or they may have a sudden change in temperature, pulse, respiration, their vital signs, because when the horse has anemia and weakness and all these things going on, it's going to be in a stress mode as well. And often IV therapy is one of the things that they just try and do to try and help. Kind of supporting is what that's usually called. Okay, I think I have one more maybe in there. Nope, one more. I guess I turn it over to Anita.
Thanks, Betsy. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear, Anita. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And I might have to turn off my video just because of we're having severe winds. So if I get messy, I'll go and turn off my video. So my name is Anita Thompson, and I didn't do a introduction slide because I was just going to jump over from Betsy's and Dr. Martinson's presentation but I work a lot with the plant side of toxicity, and we have a group here in Arizona called the Arizona Livestock Incident Response Team, or ALERT. And while it's very cattle focused, we still do sometimes see horses in this particular group. And what we do is, if there is a livestock issue, they send a rangeland or an extension agent and a veterinarian to partner and determine the cause. And this is certain circumstances. This is not everything. And so a lot of times we see the horse, it's too late. There's nothing we can do, and so it's just really disheartening. So I decided to bring that into a lot of my education for my counties. If you want a visual representation, if you can think of any old westerns, that is kind of where I work and where I live. We have irrigated areas, and most water rights are already taken. So any of those pastures are already dedicated to hay and alfalfa, and everything else is rangeland or grazing land. We had an influx of people who bought inexpensive land, and they're trying to turn it into pasture land, which is not something that happens in our area. Especially, we get sometimes less than maybe 15 inches of water a year if we're lucky. So we do have a very dire situation a lot of times with grazing out here. I came from Colorado State, worked a lot in Colorado with equines, and then did work with livestock in the Sierra Nevadas in California, and also in Nevada, and then came down to Arizona. So I've seen kind of a lot of the different variations, and it's very hard to determine in the West what an average situation would be. So when I was figuring out how to support Dr. Greene and Dr. Martinson, I was just thinking of how can we describe what a plant does to the equine when I'm not a vet, so obviously I can't give veterinary advice. And when you're looking at plants, what you're looking at is, why does the plant harm the horse? And so plants contain primary and secondary metabolites, and the toxicity generally comes from the secondary metabolite, or the defense mechanism, which is against predators. There's some that don't, but this is the main cause. And so this is a lot of plant names. If you know botany, then you know plants are grouped into families and have Latin names and things like that. But the most common effect of toxic plants are going to be alkaloids, cyanides, nitrates, and then oxalates and glycosides. So these are all the things that are going to harm the animal, and these are all secondary defense mechanisms against predators. Go ahead. And so this is just a quick, I'm not going to get too much into the chemistry part of it, but this is just a quick outline of how a plant works. So it has its primary metabolites, which it uses for development. And if you think about it, a plant's entire job is to grow, right? It wants to grow, produce seed, and then pass on its genetics or its lineage. So it's going to go and put out the primary metabolites. If it has enough energy, it's going to then add these secondary, and I know it says secondary, but this is a foreign paper, so just go ahead and roll with that. But it is environmental interactions, and that's where you're going to see your the toxicity in the plants. Go ahead. And then additionally, what you can look at, and what we have here in the West, especially in Arizona and in different areas out in the West, is a drought or a frost response. And even in Arizona, New Mexico, kind of maybe sometimes the southern part of California, you're going to see a monsoonal response. And what happens is that the plant is going to be confused by the different the different weather kind of impacts around it, and so it's going to respond accordingly with these different secondary metabolites. And so with sorghum and Sudan grass, a lot of our ranchers and our farmers, and in our horse, I want to say a lot of our horse people, because we have like maybe 5 or 6 in my counties. We have 5 or 6 true like horse, what I would call breeders or farms, and the rest are all small scale, like ranchers and farmers that have horses. or people that have horses for more of a, we have a lot of barrel racing, we have a lot of roping, things like that. So a lot of these different pursuits. Um, so a lot of times in our CS, when we work Natural Resources Conservation Service, we'll work with these farmers and they'll say, let's use sorghum and Sudan grass. And as a livestock person and as an agent, I get curdled up inside a little bit because the timing of that is it's a good forage, right? The timing of it has to be perfect. And sometimes it can be hard or you're going to impact your animal. Just the other day, we were driving down the road and there was a foal that had passed away because it was on a bad time sorghum Sudan grass fields. And it's unfortunate, but that is how plants work. With the Sudan grass and the sorghum mix, it's great for the soil. We don't really have soil here, so it helps build soil. But when it can accumulate nitrates, and then when it's wilting, you get durin, which is a secondary compound, which is also called hydrocyanic acid. And then they both interfere with the body's ability to carry oxygen in the blood, which not a good thing. Go ahead and next slide. Some of the well, it says one example of a secondary metabolite is going to be alkaloids. There's so many, I just kind of wanted to focus on a couple. But in this case, you're going to have these are some of the words I trip over, pyrrolizidine alkaloids. And so that's going to be liver damage, lung and tissue damage, and carcinogenic effects, where you have the tropane alkaloids, which can cause colic, heart rate changes, seizures, and central nervous system changes. The issue is that alkaloids appear in different plants in different amounts. So, and it's not sure exactly which one it is until you do a lot of the research behind it. Next slide. The biggest one out here in the West is loco weed. And everyone talks about loco weed because of the fact that it is one of the most well-known and it can be the most detrimental to the livestock industry, especially equines out in Arizona and out west. And so loco weed is defined as any plant containing swantonine. And that's usually found in Astragalus or Oxytropis species. SPP means species. It's an abbreviation. However, there's only certain plants in this family, Astragalus and Oxytropis, that contain this swantonine. Excuse me. So it's a complex situation. Sometimes it's a primary toxin, sometimes it's secondary. Go ahead and next slide. It also is a selenium accumulator, which in our area can and cannot be an issue. Plants will absorb selenium, which then is released to the animal when it is grazed. So if there's too much selenium in it, they can actually get selenium accumulation in their system. And the term a lot of people use is locoism for loco weed, just because it makes them kind of act crazy. That's neurological signs. I know most horses that have had it have not recovered and have had to be put down because their general demeanor changes and they are no longer like trustworthy. And in some cases, it moved into higher level issues that have then caused major life changes to the horse where it was no longer living a quality life. There is research showing that they are not addictive. Originally, when I was going through school, it was like loco weed is like cocaine to horses, and they seek it out. And so that's what I was under the premise of. But new research is showing that they are more palatable and preferred in the flower form. So research is always kind of moving along. And so one of the things that we're looking at now is that it's not necessarily addictive, but it's palatable. The issue is people get property with different all these different plants on it, and they're like, what do I do if I don't know which one is causing the issue? We love the flowers are beautiful, however it's just probably best to remove all of the species instead of finding out which one it was that causes the issue. Go ahead and next slide. Other well-known plants out west is in the Solanaceae family, which is nightshades. We know it as tomatoes, potatoes, things like that. In this case, it has these gorgeous purple flowers. And one of the things I point out to clients and stakeholders when we work with them is it's a beautiful flower, but look at what it causes. You have colic, diarrhea, birth defects, muscle tremors, weakness, other issues, potential death. So is it really, really important for you to have that flower and that plant? We tend to get a barren landscape, so when you see a flower, people don't want to remove it. In this case, I do recommend, when you see these plants, you remove them. Same with the Senecio family or ragwort and groundsel. You're looking at jaundice, photosensitivity, weight loss, incoordination, other issues, and then potential death. So I always go with, hey, I love the fact that you want flowers on your property and you want these plants. However, this is something you want to watch for and manage for. Next slide. And when people, when they were talking earlier, Laura and everyone was saying, talk to your extension agent, most of the time I'm the one that gets the call. And a lot of times I find that people want me to solve the problem and it's a one-sided kind of way. Well, I do ask that the people that I work with are, it's a two-way street and we work together. So I say, ask questions. First of all, what is growing on my land? You can use a lot of resources. Extension has resources. Also, native plant societies are great because they know every plant. They have botanists. I'm part of one, and they have botanists, and they will find every plant for you. So if you want to know, reach out to, there's different resources. Are your pastures in good shape? Laura did an amazing presentation on that. Out west, we don't have pastures, we have rangeland unless you're in an irrigated pasture and then you have a pasture. So it's just determining where you fall in that. Where is your nearest vet? I cannot stress enough to people that I work with is build your relationship now before something happens, because a lot of times vets out here are hard to come by. And so when we get a vet, we keep them and we want to protect them. And, so a lot of times, as an agent, I'll sit there and say, hey, you need to know your vet now, because when something happens, your vet's got 15, 20 other clients and they may not be able to rush to your side. So have that relationship now. And also that way, what your horse needs and where they need to stay away from. How much could my horse have eaten? I don't know how many times I've gotten the call. I think my horse ate toxic plant. Well, what were they eating? Well, I don't know. I just turned them out. And it's like, well, I mean, at this point in time, you need to know kind of like that interaction of what is your horse eating and what could they have eaten. Next slide. And then my last slide is check your hay. Many interactions are not from grazing, but also can be found in hay. We have so Arizona and Colorado are our main, Utah are our main routes for hay. And so you want to know where you're getting your hay. The biggest thing is avoid when you go to your feed store and you're not producing your own hay, avoid a lot of one-offs. So if you're like, hey, where do you get your hay? And the feed store is like, well, I know a guy who knows a guy who knows a guy. That's really scary to me because it reduces the ability to ask the question, what happened and where. So if something happens, I can't ask, well, did you call the farmer and say, hey, look, your alfalfa has some, something in it? No, because, I'm way off. You get what you pay for. Everyone loves a deal, but you get weedy surprises. Our cheapest hay out here is some sort of hay that is also listed with local plants. And so when I call and I say, what are the local plants? They're like, I don't know, it's just what grows here, but we don't spray. So, it's not a big deal. It's organic. And I work in the organic industry a lot with farmers. So I'm like, ooh, okay, so just because you don't spray, but also, do you know what you're giving your clients? And the other thing is you can get a cheaper deal when you're purchasing hay off the field. You drive up, you pay the farmer $5, $6 less per bale to be able to load it yourself right off the field, because then they don't have to do the work. Again, you don't know what's in it. So just check your hay, know your hay, and just be kind of aware of what's going on and what your horse friend is eating. And that's what I have.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anita, Betsy, and Krishona. So I just ask you guys to Yeah, go ahead. I see everybody's smiling faces. We have a few questions that we'll start with, but I also encourage people to go ahead and ask some more questions in the Q&A chat. We have a few minutes for some questions. So I'm going to start off, and I'm going to just kind of fire the question off, and whoever wants to answer it, go. If you want to have multiples chime in, great as well. But I think the first question that came through is a good one, because I kind of wonder this as well. How can you tell the difference between the regular condition, like scratches in the horses and around their feet, and what happens when you have problems with wild parsnip reactions? So what is there subtle differences there?
Well, Carrie, that's a great question. And I think that that is really important to not, uh, you need to find the wild parsnip. So obviously scratches is a bacterial or fungal infection, and I have found it sort of on the back part of the limbs, where if you have a horse that's being impacted by wild parsnip, anywhere there's white is where you will see those lesions. So if they have white socks, um, it could be really challenging. But remember, like the whole front of their leg, all the way up to their knee, wherever that white is, will be infected. Where with scratches, it's pretty close, kind of right around the hoof and the back. So it is a subtle difference. But again, you wild parsnip is easy to see. It's a big plant. It's 2 to 3 feet tall. It has this giant umbrella yellow flower in the second year of growth. So it's one of those cases where it could be subtle, but wild parsnip is going to be really anywhere there's white where the horse could interact with the sun.
Great. Awesome. So I just asked Kyle, we still have some more questions, but I see a couple people dropping off. I asked Kyle to add in the chat box the link to the evaluations from the seminar today. So please, please, please fill out the evaluations, because I can't just make stuff up every year. These presentations are based on things that were asked in previous years. So I always go back and I ask people, what do you want to hear about? Did you like it? Did you not like it? That's why we've been doing these so many years, because everybody says, don't stop, don't stop. And we get a lot of feedback. So please fill out the evaluation. But we're not done yet. We've got a lot more questions. So here's another one. Is dicambia still on the market? There's been several restrictions placed in 2024, and I thought it was pulled off the market. Can someone?
Yeah, that is a great question. So dicamba is something, there are several federal lawsuits going on, especially as it applies to being applied to soybeans, and because it can drift and negatively impact non-target plants. That is a state by state, I believe, issue. So you would need to make sure you understand the rules in your state and make sure you understand if it applies to just soybeans or if it applies to all things dicamba. But that is a great question. It's definitely in the media, and I believe it is state by state at this point.
And I can add to that too.
Please.
With the dicambia products, they're going to be like different labels based on their intellectual properties or patenting. And so right now, definitely Roundup Ready Extend technology using dicambia is completely shut down. But it is state by state. There are some potential other products that have, and I'm just trying to look at the right terminology. Um, they have not vacated their registrations yet, so they're holding on to it based on the new administration. So there's not, yes, it is, but there is a potential that could actually shift back into based on different registrations with the different products. But right now, the Roundup Ready with Extend technology is not allowed in 2025, which is the main dicambia product under that particular registration patent, things like that. But check your state regulations 100% for Dr. Martinson on that.
Sounds complicated. So the question next says, I know you can have your hay tested for nutritional value, but can there be a hay test done for toxic things or things that are not grass or hay?
Yeah, unfortunately not. because even poisonous plants have things like crude protein, fiber, carbohydrates, moisture. So evaluation for toxic plants really needs to be done visually. I wish there was some magic test, but there isn't. That's a visual assessment.
Yeah, and I would mention too that we actually have a place on campus that you can bring things to have identified, but you need to think about if you're going to do something like that wherever you are, bring the whole plant, including the roots and things, wrap it up in damp, what is it, paper or paper bag or something like that. Krishona, you're the expert at that stuff. And definitely it's, you know, we did hay tests on hay evaluation, and we had the best testing hay was this rock hard, had been wet alfalfa bale that was just you know, nothing would touch it, but it had great chemical evaluation. So food for thought.
And also, I would really put a plug, like Laura and Anita said, for your local county extension office. I believe every state has a county or hopefully a cluster. If it's not in your county, maybe the one next door, should have a resource, whether it's an egg agent, a master gardener, someone that could help you identify your plant. And if you don't have that resource, local egg cooperatives will have an agronomist, who also tend to be really well versed, as will your local soil and water conservation district, and even your local DNR if it's some kind of woody shrub thing, because woody shrub things are a little bit more challenging for us herbaceous plant people.
Woody shrub thing. And that is a very scientific terminology.
It is.
So yes, I did answer a question earlier, and I should have made it public to say, you know, even if you just Google, you know, your county, state, cooperative extension, your office should come up. So like Monmouth County, New Jersey Cooperative Extension, and it should come up. Even if you're not county, some states do it regionally. I know Laura's a regional educator in Pennsylvania, so yeah, definitely reach out to them because they're really going to know more of the local things. So definitely. All right, just a couple quick questions left, and then I know we got to wrap things up. It's definitely later here on the East Coast, but we'll wrap it up for everybody. I just got new hay and noticed my gelding is stocking up, but then it goes away again, and then it comes back. So it goes back and forth. Is this common that it comes and goes, and how can we treat it?
Well, first of all, I think we all 5 of us on here would encourage you to work with your veterinarian. So remember, first of all, investigate the hay and see if you see anything that would cause stocking up, like horiolism. It isn't really common for it to come and go. It usually comes and stays until you remove the hay. It could be that maybe there's higher concentrations of horiolisms in certain bales. I would also hope that if you have brand new hay, even if the hay is similar, like you are feeding an older grass hay, this is a newer grass hay, you would have acclimated your horse slowly to that change over 10 days. Anytime we change a feed source, even if it's old hay to new hay, that's grass, we want to do that slowly. So the first thing I would do is carefully look at your hay, contact your veterinarian, bring in a hay sample to like a flake of hay into your county extension office, and then just try a process of elimination, figure out what it is. But you have to be able to find that poisonous plant in the hay to have that evidence of ingestion. And the rest of you can weigh in as well.
Well, we have one more question, and as I throw this question out, I'm going to share my screen with a QR code for the evaluation. So if those want to do it on your phone, you could do it quickly on your phone. But our final question for our presenters today are, because farmers are starting to use biosolids and chicken litter on fields, and it tests good for nutrients, but is there a test for these metals, chemicals, or even hazardous materials?
I can say I was answering some of Ron's questions before, and I'd love to hear what Krishona has to say as well. You can get your soil and your forage tested for different minerals. So, you know, it might be a little pricey, but you can get that done. As far as chemicals, you need to know what chemicals you're looking for to know if you can get it tested or not. Other hazardous materials, I know like the PFAS, if I can remember what that stands for, the forever chemicals that are really big right now. Those can come from biosolids, and can you get hay tested for those? I'm not sure. Do you know, Krishona?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is not my area of expertise, but the PFAS or forever chemicals is definitely an emerging science. I'm part of a group that looks at sort of waste management because we've done some carcass composting work. And they had a webinar about a month ago really focusing on PFAS on the East Coast as it relates to dairy farms, and then finding the PFAS in the cattle and in the milk. So chicken litter and other things have been applied forever, right? This isn't a new thing. But what is new is this sort of accumulation of PFAS. And now we're trying to figure out which forage species can kind of pull that PFAS, those forever chemicals out of the ground. We don't feed them. There's kind of this whole emerging science. So I do believe you can test things for PFAS because I saw some research on that. Where that is done, I'm sorry, I don't know. Again, I attended a webinar just because I was interested in gaining just a slight basis in that emerging research area. But the rest of you, I don't know if you know what labs can test what, whether it's forage, animal tissues, or even fertilizer types for those PFAS. The other things like Laura mentioned, we can test for pretty easily. Minerals, things of that nature, nutrients.
Awesome. Well, on that note, we are going to end the webinar. I really want to say thank you. Let's do a huge round of applause for all of our speakers. I think this was a really great kind of pasture night. So hopefully everybody learned a lot. On that note, I say thank you so much, and we'll see you again later. Thank you, everybody.
Bye. Thank you, Carrie. Bye, everyone.
Yeah, bye. Thank you.
Thank you.